Gamma and Delta quadrants. This is New Frontiers and a look at Star Trek: Strange New Worlds. I am your host, Movers and Shakers Unlimited film critic, author, and head of the Northern Virginia Star Trek meetup, Josh Pritchett. I am hoping to be joined later in this show by my friend and co-host, Chris Pabon. Uh, but um, but until then, I just want to let you all know I am broadcasting today from the Walter Washington Convention Center, where AwesomeCon 2022 is taking place. If you are in the DC area, there's still some great guests to see and get autographs. So come on down and see us. It's really been quite a good show this weekend. Gotten to see from Star Trek Discovery, Anthony Rapp and Wilson Cruz, and fellow nerd and longtime Star Trek star, the great Will Wheaton. So, uh, without further ado, let's get into our recap of this week's Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Hit it! So, this week, this is episode 105 of Strange New Worlds, known as Spock Amok, which is a play on the title of the classic series episode Amok Time, in which Spock had to return to Vulcan in order to get married because he was undergoing Pon farr. Well, this week's episode opens with Spock on Vulcan preparing to marry to Pring, and his family's traditional gathering place of Kunat Kalafi, which is the Vulcan mating ritual. Suddenly, just as they are about to take their vows, Pring points at Spock and says, "Spock, your ears." And Spock looks up at his ears and finds that they are no longer pointy, but they are now very human-looking ears. Pring then announces that she will not marry a human under any circumstances and chooses Kunat Kalafi, which is ritual combat. And Spock is then forced to fight himself. Spock begins a prolonged battle against his Vulcan self and suddenly wakes up in a cold sweat on his quarters in the Enterprise, which is at Starbase 1, getting repaired after its encounter with the Gorn. Spock is, as the scene continues on, we find Spock is trying to prepare his quarters for a visit from Pring. But also Spock has also got to help Captain Pike with a diplomatic assignment as an alien species that has a territory between the Romulan and Klingon empires, is in negotiations with to become an ally of the Federation in order to give Starfleet vessels safe passage through their territory so that they may explore the Beta Quadrant, much of which is largely controlled by the Romulans and the Klingons. While this is going on, Nurse Chapel is preparing for a hopefully big date with another Starfleet officer. Ortega's is kind of giving her some advice because Nurse Chapel apparently has had a number of bad dates and bad relationships. We also discover, incidentally, Christine Chapel is actually bisexual. She's dated both men and women. So the date does not go well. We'll get into that in a little bit. Meanwhile, while the rest of the crew is taking shore leave at Starbase 1, Una and Leon decide to stay aboard the Enterprise to get caught up on some work. And while they are doing that, there's suddenly a red alert that there's been a breach in the airlock. Luna and Una go down. I keep mispronouncing her name. Go down to investigate and find two crew members in spacesuits trying to go out the airlock because it is part of the ritual game we heard mentioned in episode 102, Enterprise Bingo, in which enlisted crewmen and junior officers attempt fulfill a certain number of tasks to sort of do as a checkoff on boxes to say that, yeah, I did that when I was on the Enterprise. Meanwhile, coming back to the negotiations, Pike, Spock, and Uhura are negotiating with the alien species known as the Regarans. Negotiations seem to be going well, um, and it seems like they're on the path to, making the deal. But then Admiral Robert April comes to Pike and says that negotiations have gone south. Apparently, Regards are not happy about something, and they now only want to talk to Spock, which is about to become very problematic because Spock and T'Pring have decided to do this particular type of deep mind meld because they feel like they are not seeing each other's perspective. T'Pring thinks that Spock is too obsessed with his duties to Starfleet, and Spock is secretly worried that he is not Vulcan enough for T'Pring. Well, unfortunately, the mind meld goes badly, and a kind of a Freaky Friday type situation. Spock and T'Pring trade Katras, which, of course, if you recall from Star Trek 3, is essentially the Vulcan soul. Spock tries to figure out a ritual to reverse the process and is unsuccessful. However, then Pike comes in to tell Spock that he needs him to carry on negotiations. And Spock and T'Pring admit to Pike, quite logically, they have switched bodies. And this is a kind of an issue, but Pike asks the T'Pring to undertake the negotiations in Spock's form. Meanwhile, Spock, still in the body of T'Pring, is still trying to find a way to reverse what has happened, and has been called by T'Pring's assistant to fulfill a task. It turns out that T'Pring is sort of involved in a form of Vulcan law enforcement in which she goes around and tries to bring Vulcans who have strayed away from the path of logic and have left Vulcan back into the fold. Some of them may have committed criminal activities and that sort of thing. So apparently this one particular Vulcan has said he will only surrender to T'Pring. So Spock, in the body of T'Pring, recruits Nurse Chapel to help him with his problem, since she initially gave him advice about the mind meld. Meanwhile, during negotiations, T'Pring / Spock is trying to negotiate with the Regarans, and it doesn't really go well. But Pike and April are observing, and when it starts to go right, Pike jumps in and says that when basically the Regarans are having issues with the whole idea of joining the Federation and cultural norms, and T'Pring is sort of caught off guard. Pike jumps in and explains that Spock is what is best about Starfleet, that because he is half human, half Vulcan, he is part of this great cultural meld, that he is both the best of Vulcan and Earth. And then Pike quietly apologizes to T'Pring for putting her in that situation. Meanwhile, Spock, still in the form of T'Pring, confronts the Vulcan who they need to bring in. He becomes belligerent towards Christine, and Spock gives him a very logical right cross across the job. Meanwhile, Dr. M'Benga and Christine have discovered a way that they could reverse the process of the mind meld and get T'Pring and Spock back to their appropriate bodies, which they do. Meanwhile, Pike has figured out what the deal is with the Regarans because they seem to kind of change their behavior whenever someone else is in the room. And what it is Pike realizes that the Regarans just want someone to see things from their point of view. And he sits back down with them and he says, yeah, you're absolutely right. Joining the Federation would be, or becoming an ally of the Federation would be an enormous burden for you. And we tend to get into a lot of trouble. We have a lot of enemies. They'd be your enemies. And I don't really know what it is, I could say to you to get you to want to come over and help us. And Regard's not, and ultimately agreed to an alliance with the Federation, so Starfleet can now cross their territory safely and explore the Beta Quadrant. Meanwhile, T'Pring and Spock reconcile their differences quite romantically, and both realize that they now have seen things from the other's point of view, and it has made their relationship better. Meanwhile, Christine has come to the realization that she thinks she's found the perfect guy. Unfortunately, he is taken. Longtime fans know, of course, we mean Spock. But, so that was really good. Sorry, folks, this is the burden of live broadcasts. You never know what's going to happen. So basically, the overarching theme of the show, as we get into the good, the bad, and the Gorn, was the idea of, can you see something from somebody else's point of view? And has, with all things Star Trek, is extremely timely. And given the fact that, what's going on in the world today with all the differences we're having here in the United States and around the world, everybody feels very divided and disconnected. And sometimes some people just want to see something from somebody else's point of view. And, that's probably a good idea. Maybe that would help a lot of people. And in this episode, it obviously does. I mean, Pritchett and Spock see doing each other's jobs, sort of see what the other one goes through and the pressures and everything. And, Pritchett realizing Spock's anxieties about will he be Vulcan enough. And she seems to be quite confident that, yes, you are Vulcan enough for me, and that she accepts his human side. And obviously the Regard's just wanting the Federation to understand that the Federation sees their point of view, what kind of risk they're taking, because they've managed to negotiate having, not getting either annexed by the Klingons or the Romulans for this long, and joining with the Federation could actually be a real danger to their civilization. But apparently, they realize the Federation will have their backs if anything happens. So that works out. And, obviously, you had a lot of interesting stuff with Christine and her subplot trying to find, someone, a prospective long-term relationship with someone. And feeling like, she's found that person. Unfortunately, he's taken. So, but as we know from the original series, there was a lot of flirtations there by Chapel towards Spock. So overall, I thought that all of that was very good. I also thought something interesting that we saw. Pike was wearing the famous gold-green wraparound tunic that we saw Captain Kirk wear sometimes on the original Star Trek. The reason for the wraparound was because it was just a convenient way to hide Shatner's weight, which seemed to go up a lot as the 3 seasons of Star Trek went on, and he just wasn't able to get out and exercise as much. But obviously, I don't think Asimov has that problem. They just wore the tunic. I loved how they recreated but updated Spock's place of Kunat Kalafi, and the fact that they were using the original music from that episode, which is so iconic. It's kind of this da 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 da. It's used for a lot of the big fight scenes on the original show. So I'm glad that was back, that they did that. It was a nice tribute. I don't think they were necessarily making that to be funny. One other thing I liked, was just I think the how you've got the whole thing with Leon and Una as they discover the whole thing about Enterprise bingo, and then they decide to even though they're regarded as two people that are not known for being a lot of laughs on the ship by the crew, they decide, let's try this. Let's see what the perspective is. Because again, it goes back to the whole idea of, can you see someone else's perspective? So they decide to, in order to understand the rest of the crew, they decide to take on the Enterprise bingo, and ultimately it ends with them walking out on the hull of the ship and seeing this one piece of scarred hull plating that is still part of the original hull plating of the Enterprise, because obviously that ship has seen a lot of damage in its time already, and everybody apparently goes out and signs it, so they decide to sign their names, and they finally understand what the point of it is. It's part of being part of the history of this ship, and, which is already a legend in Starfleet, because obviously the first Federation starship, or the first Earth warship, is called Enterprise, and this is the second Starfleet vessel to bear that name. And of course, historically, Earth has always had, particularly the American Navy, has had one ship or another named Enterprise. So there's a lot of history there. So that was really cool. I don't really have much bad to say about the show, about this episode. I think each week it is, and I know I'm kind of shamelessly plugging this, each week it seems to be getting better in my mind. And it started off at a 10. It's gone, I think, to a 16 by now. It's just consistently been good. It is definitely, I think, in my opinion, the best live action Star Trek show we have right now. It's not saying the other shows are bad. It's just this one, the writing is just tighter, and I think it helps that the show is more episodic than having these big overarching storylines that we've seen in Picard and then Discovery, which they can be good, but sometimes it gets a little convoluted. Okay, well, on that note, we're going to wrap it up a little early today because we are at the convention, and there's a lot of things to be seen and done here today. So I'm going to let everybody go, and once again, my book, Bigfoot and Other Tales of the Supernatural, is available on Amazon and Kindle. I will be selling copies in person at the Bigfoot Conference in Stanton, Virginia in 2 weeks, and again at Shore Leave starting July 16th. So in the meantime, I am your host, as always, Josh Pritchett, and on behalf of my friend Chris Papillon, who couldn't join us today, live long and prosper. Kapla!